Hi, you're joining me live at the Javits Center for the Nest Summit. My guest today is Matt Diserio, CEO of Water Asset Management. Matt is an expert on water and everything water, and definitely the person that first introduced me to the concept of what the risks are around climate change. First time I met Matt, he said, what are the 5 things you think about when you think about climate change? And I really thought about, bad weather, other things, rising seas, but he said that you can think about it as floods, droughts, water scarcity, extreme heat, and extreme weather events. And it did start to make me think a little bit differently about climate risk and investing and the capital markets. Matt, thanks so much for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure to be with you today, Jeff.
So Matt, what was the first trigger that got you started on investing in water?
Well, water, we believe, is the resource that is defining the 21st century, much like oil defined the last century. And when we looked into the industry, what we realized was that it's an industry made up of some of the best long-term businesses of any industry that we'd ever looked at before. The water industry is made up of companies that are either monopolies or oligopolies. And both types of businesses have very strong, positive, inflation-protected pricing power, which enables these companies to grow earnings and increase their dividends at a very steady rate. And when we looked at that and realized that most people don't really think about water very often, and that there was this multi-trillion-dollar capital investment super cycle underway to repair water-related infrastructure that had been ignored and ensure water quality and water supply, that's when we dropped everything else that we were doing and started investing exclusively in companies, assets, and equities in the water industry.
Matt, maybe you could make some connections for us on climate change and water, because I think a lot of people think about rising sea level when they think about climate change, but there's lots of other factors at play. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, well, sure. What we often ask, everyone knows climate change, global warming is bad. But when you ask people well, why is it bad? Often you get very long, somewhat complicated answers. And what we believe, and if you think about it, the reason climate change is bad, the primary initial negative impact of climate change is on the water cycle. It's disrupting the traditional water cycle. It's making more drought and more flood. And a lot of the problems that people talk about related to climate change, such as food security issues and health issues, are really second derivatives of more drought and more flood. And the companies that we invest in the water industry, have been dealing with addressing and solving problems related to drought and flood, some of these companies literally for over 100 years. And so we believe that water investing is a direct way to play, or to invest, I should say, in climate-related problems and delivering those kinds of solutions. And what we really like about the water industry is not only the return profile of the companies, but the fact that they're companies where we're able to measure the positive impact that the companies are having by either delivering more water, getting more water to more people, treating more wastewater, and doing it with a greater percentage of renewable energy, which is a trend that's occurring in the industry.
Matt, that's great. Give us some examples of how you actually invest and how you could create a diversified portfolio around water as a theme.
Sure. So we have 2 teams at Water Asset Management that operate independently. One is the public equity team, which invests in global listed water stocks around the world. And these companies are regulated water utilities, long-term water, wastewater, and desalination concession business models, companies that manufacture everything water related, pipes, pumps, meters, treatment, chemicals and membranes, engineering companies that build water-related infrastructure, as well as all different kinds of water-related technologies. There are a number of different mega trends occurring in the development of water-related technologies. And then we have a private equity team that's separate that invests in water rights in the Western United States. So we have two separate teams, and we invest in virtually every sector of the water industry, from regulated water utilities right through all the manufactured products, as well as directly into water rights in the Western United States. And this gives us a very deep domain experience and expertise in terms of understanding what works better and what works less in the water industry, not only to generate returns, but to solve water-related and water scarcity problems.
Matt, certainly in my lifetime, it's really been only the recent history where we've seen countries that are actually running out of water. Could you address water scarcity with us?
Sure. We've seen it's staggering when you look, as we do, we look very closely at these situations. A city like Sao Paulo, 20 million people, literally nearly ran out of water a few years ago. I mean, it was dead. The reservoirs, which we were monitoring the hydrology on these reservoirs, came to within 10% of literally having no water in the reservoirs. There was major cutbacks in service and water delivery during that period. A lot of people have read about what happened in Cape Town, South Africa. These are major cities that are literally coming very, very, very close to completely running out of water. And it's happening close to home as well. Water scarcity is a significant problem, not only in the arid Southwest, but there were a couple of summers ago in Fairfield County, Connecticut, not far from where you're standing. Water had to be piped from one town, which had a surplus supply, to another town in Fairfield County during a period of summer drought there. So drought is a major, major problem. It's getting worse. It's intensifying because of climate change. And the key is that, from our experience, every water problem, whether it's a quality problem or a supply problem, is solvable. What's required is both capital, will, and competence. These are all problems that are not, this isn't rocket science. It's more pipes, more pumps, more meters. It's ensuring more supply. And all of those things are doable if the appropriate amount of capital combined with competence is applied to those individual localized water supply and water quality problems.
And certainly we know water is the one thing that has no alternative. When you think about impact, Matt, how do you measure impact across your portfolios?
Well, we have been very active in developing water-related impact metrics, not only for ourselves, but for other significant investment institutions. And what we do is we have a survey of roughly 50 different questions that we ask all of our companies that we invest in the portfolio. And we're still generally in very early days in terms of companies being able to answer all these questions. They're working on it and they're getting better, but it's still, as I said, very early in their company's capacity to really measure how much water, how much electricity they use, and how they apply that water to each unit of production. And that's something that we're very much involved in helping our companies get their arms around. But we really focus on a couple of very basic KPI, key performance indicators, to measure impact. And as I mentioned earlier, it's how much water is being delivered to how many more people by the portfolio in a given year. How much more wastewater is being treated to prevent ecosystems from being destroyed in a given year, and how much energy is being used to deliver each cubic meter or treat each cubic meter of water, and how much of that energy is coming from hopefully an increasingly renewable supply. Those are a couple of very basic but very profound and important key performance indicators that companies are having an easier time measuring, and that demonstrate the kind of impact that our water-focused portfolio is able to deliver.
Matt, lastly, can you touch on things like Flint, Michigan, or Newark, New Jersey, where we're dealing with toxic water systems and delivery? How does that affect the portfolio investments that you make?
Well, the significance of Flint, Michigan, and Newark and there are literally thousands of water systems in the United States that are dealing with problems around lead and other contaminants in water systems similar to Flint and other cities. The significance is that Flint was really like the bell tower, the canary in the coal mine that woke up more people, consumers, regulators to the significance of this problem. And as I mentioned earlier, all these problems are solvable. And what it requires is capital, the application and investment of that capital in an appropriate way. And what it also requires is appropriate pricing for these water and wastewater related services in order for all the costs associated with that capital to be appropriately allocated. And so that's really the significance of Flint, and it's increasing the awareness amongst a broader range of people, both in policy and at the consumer level, to the need for growing and increasing amounts of capital to solve these problems. And again, the companies we invest in are the ones that provide those solutions. They provide the treatment, they provide new pumps, they provide meters, which enables water and wastewater services to be properly measured. And it's just indicative of the very significant capital investment super cycle that's not only essential, but is underway to begin to address these problems. And it's going to take decades to do this. And that's one of the reasons that we believe we're in what we think is like a 50-year secular bull market trend to invest in the companies in the water industry that provide these kinds of solutions that Flint and Newark are indicative of.
Thank you, Matt, for joining us at the Nest Summit. And as you've heard Matt tell us, there's risks and opportunities with everything that we look at around climate change. But the one resource that we can't live without is water. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, Jeff.